I was folding laundry when someone knocked on my door at nearly 10 o'clock. Through the window I glimpsed a familiar silhouette. Margaret, my former boss's widow. Rain clung to her dark hair, and her usually composed demeanor had crumbled. I hadn't seen her since David's funeral 4 months ago. My heart hammered as I opened the door. She looked up at me with those same green eyes that had haunted my thoughts, stepped closer until I could smell her perfume, and whispered words that made my world stop. "I've been searching for you since that night." Everything inside me froze. "That night," she whispered again, as if the words held sacred weight. I stepped back, letting her into my apartment, watching as she wrapped her arms around herself. The rain had soaked through her coat, and I grabbed a towel from the bathroom, my mind racing back to 6 months ago. David had collapsed at the office on a Thursday evening. I was the only one still there, finishing quarterly reports when I heard the thud from his corner office. By the time the paramedics arrived, he was gone. Massive heart attack at 52. I rode with him in the ambulance, called Margaret, stayed at the hospital until she arrived. "You stayed with me," she said now, reading my thoughts. "Everyone else left after the doctor gave us the news, but you stayed." I remembered that night in painful detail. Margaret had been in shock, sitting in that sterile waiting room chair, staring at nothing. The hospital chaplain had come and gone. Her sister lived 3 states away. David's business partners had paid their respects and disappeared, but something in her hollow expression kept me rooted to the spot. "You brought me coffee," she continued, her voice stronger now. "Terrible hospital coffee, but you remembered I took it black, and when I started crying, really crying, not those polite tears I'd been holding back all day, you didn't try to stop me or tell me everything would be okay." The memory felt like yesterday. Margaret had broken down around midnight, these raw, devastating sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than grief. I'd moved to the chair beside her, not saying anything, just sitting there while she fell apart. "You let me cry on your shoulder for an hour," she said, her eyes meeting mine. "You didn't know me. I was just your boss's wife who showed up at company events. But you held me like I mattered." My throat tightened. That's not how I remembered it. I remembered thinking she was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen, even in her devastation. I remembered the weight of her head against my shoulder, the way her hair smelled like jasmine despite everything. I remembered feeling guilty for noticing these things while she grieved. "When you finally spoke," Margaret continued, settling onto my couch, "you said the kindest thing anyone had ever said to me. Do you remember?" I did. God help me, I remembered every word. "I told you that David talked about you constantly, how proud he was of the photography business you'd started, how he'd show anyone who'd listen the pictures you took on your weekend trips. You made me feel like a person again, instead of just a widow." Her voice cracked slightly. "And then you asked if I wanted to get out of there, go somewhere that didn't smell like disinfectant. We'd driven to an all-night diner in my car because she was too shaken to drive, sat in a corner booth, drinking coffee and talking about everything except death, her photography, my plans to eventually leave corporate life, books we'd both read." She'd laughed at something I said, this surprised little sound, and then immediately looked guilty for having a moment of lightness. "I went home that morning feeling less alone than I had in months," she said. "But when I tried to find you at the funeral, I stayed in the back," I admitted. "I thought it would be inappropriate. You had family, real friends. I was just—" "You were the person who saw me," she interrupted. "Really saw me. And I've been trying to find you ever since." The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken understanding. I watched Margaret's fingers trace the rim of the mug I'd given her, chamomile tea this time, something warmer than hospital coffee. She'd kicked off her wet shoes and tucked her feet under herself on my couch, looking smaller somehow than I remembered. "So what now?" I asked, settling into the armchair across from her. "You found me." A smile tugged at her lips, the first real one I'd seen. "Honestly, I didn't think that far ahead. I've been driving by your apartment for weeks, trying to work up the courage to knock." "Weeks?" I raised an eyebrow. "Margaret, you could have just called. I'm in the phone book." She laughed, actually laughed, and the sound filled something hollow in my chest. "Oh sure, hi, this is your dead boss's widow. Remember that night when I cried all over your shirt? Want to grab dinner?" She shook her head. "I'm 35 years old, and I was stalking you like a teenager." "Stalking is a strong word. I prefer reconnaissance. Is that what we're calling it?" Her eyes sparkled with something I hadn't seen that night at the hospital, Mashif. "Well, my reconnaissance told me you leave for work at 7:30 every morning with a travel mug that says world's okayest employee." I felt heat creep up my neck. "You've been watching me leave for work?" "Only on Tuesdays," she said, then caught my expression. "I'm joking." "God, your face." I saw you exactly twice and both times I panicked and drove away." The mental image of Margaret panicking made me grin despite myself. The composed Mrs. Henderson panicking? "Former Mrs. Henderson," she corrected quietly. "And you'd be surprised how little composure I have these days." She set down her mug, looking suddenly vulnerable again. "I haven't been sleeping, haven't been eating much. My sister thinks I need therapy." "Do you think you need therapy?" "Probably," she met my eyes. "But I think I needed to find you first. You were the last good thing about that terrible day." Something shifted in the air between us, a current I hadn't felt in months, maybe years. "Margaret, Maggie," she said softly. "David always called me Margaret, everyone does. But I'd like you to call me Maggie." The intimacy of it caught me off guard, a name just for me. "Maggie," I repeated, and she smiled like I'd given her something precious. "I know this is complicated," she said, leaning forward slightly. "I know it looks strange, showing up here like this, but that night talking to you, it was the first time in months I felt like myself again, not David's grieving widow or the poor woman everyone whispers about at the grocery store. Just me." I studied her face in the lamplight, the way her eyes crinkled when she talked, the small scar on her chin I'd never noticed before. "Who is that? The real you, I mean." "I'm not sure anymore," she admitted. "I used to think I knew, but sitting here with you, I remember pieces, I remember laughing, I remember what it felt like to have someone actually listen when I talked. I'm listening now." She curled deeper into the couch cushions and for the next hour we talked. Really talked. About her photography, about the novel I'd been writing in my spare time, about traveling and dreams deferred, and what it meant to start over, and slowly, carefully, something beautiful began to bloom between us in the quiet of my living room. The next few weeks fell into an unexpected rhythm. Maggie started coming by on Thursday evenings, research visits, she called them, claiming she needed to study my terrible cooking skills for a photography project about domestic disasters. I'd pretend to be offended while she documented my attempts at making anything more complex than spaghetti. "Oh no," she said one Thursday, camera raised as I stood over a smoking pan. "This is definitely going in the before folder." "Before what?" I asked, waving away the smoke. "Before I teach you that food isn't supposed to turn black." She bumped my hip with hers, taking over the stove with an ease that made my kitchen feel like home for the first time. "Move over, disaster chef." I watched her work, noting how she hummed under her breath, how she tasted everything with the tip of a wooden spoon. "You know, for someone researching domestic disasters, you're awfully good at preventing them." "Hidden talent," she said, glancing at me over her shoulder. "I'm full of surprises. I'm starting to figure that out." The words came out softer than I intended, and something flickered in her eyes before she turned back to the stove. These moments kept happening, small touches that lingered, conversations that veered towards something deeper, silences that hummed with possibility. When she laughed at my terrible jokes, I felt like I could conquer the world. When she caught me watching her edit photos on her laptop, she'd raise an eyebrow and ask if I liked what I saw, and I'd flush like a teenager. "You're staring again," she said one evening, not looking up from her camera. "I'm observing," I corrected, settling beside her on the couch. "It's different." "Observing what, exactly?" "How you get this little crease between your eyebrows when you're concentrating, how you bite your lip when you're editing something you're not sure about." I paused. "How beautiful you look when you're doing what you love." That made her look up. "Careful," she said, but her voice was breathless. "Compliments like that might go to my head." "Good, you should know how extraordinary you are." The air between us crackled with electricity. She was close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes, close enough to smell that jasmine perfume that had haunted me for months. Her gaze dropped to my lips, and for a heartbeat, I thought she might close the distance between us. Then her phone rang. She pulled back like she'd been burned, answering with a shaky, "Hello?" I watched her face change, watched the color drain from her cheeks. "Yes, I understand," she said into the phone. "Tomorrow at 2, I'll be there." When she hung up, her hands were trembling. "What's wrong?" I asked, reaching for her. She stood abruptly, gathering her things with jerky movements. "That was David's lawyer. There's been a development with the estate, something about inconsistencies in the will." My stomach dropped. "Maggie, what kind of inconsistencies?" She paused at my door, her hand on the knob, and when she looked back at me her eyes were filled with fear. The kind that suggest David might have been hiding something from me, something big. The door closed behind her, leaving me staring at the space where she'd been, wondering if whatever David had hidden was about to destroy the fragile thing growing between us. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Maggie's terrified expression as she left. By morning, I'd convinced myself to give her space, but when my phone rang at 6 a.m., her name on the screen, all my resolve crumbled. "Can you come over?" Her voice was hollow, defeated. "Please, I can't process this alone." I found her in David's home office, surrounded by papers, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy. She looked up when I entered, and something in her expression made my chest tight. "He left me nothing," she said, her voice eerily calm. 23 years of marriage, and he left me absolutely nothing. I knelt beside her chair, trying to make sense of the documents scattered across David's mahogany desk. "That can't be right, there has to be. Everything goes to someone named Elena Vasquez." Maggie's laugh was bitter, broken. His life partner, according to the will dated 6 months before he died. Apparently David had been living a double life for years. The words hit me like a physical blow. "Maggie, I'm so sorry, there's more." She handed me a folder with my name written on the tab. "He left you something, a letter." My hands shook as I opened it, David's familiar handwriting filling the page. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and Margaret has found out about Elena. I know this makes me a coward, but I couldn't tell her while I was alive. Elena has been my partner for 8 years. We have a daughter together, she's 5 now. Margaret deserved better than the lie our marriage became, but I was too selfish to let her go. Take care of her, James. You're a good man, and she's going to need someone who sees her worth. Don't let my mistakes destroy her chance at real happiness." I read it twice, my mind reeling. "He knew," I whispered. "About us. About how I felt about you. Did you?" Maggie's voice was barely audible. "Feel something for me even then?" The question hung between us like a live wire. "Yes," I admitted. "God help me, yes. Even at the funeral, even knowing it was wrong, it wasn't wrong." She stood suddenly, pacing to the window. "That's what's killing me. All this guilt I've carried about starting to care for you, about feeling alive again, and David had already moved on years ago. He had a whole other family." I watched her shoulders shake with suppressed emotion. "Maggie, don't you see?" She turned back to me, her eyes blazing. "Everything about our relationship is tainted now. That night at the hospital when you comforted me. I was grieving a man who'd stopped loving me years ago. These past weeks when I've been falling for you, I was falling for my dead husband's employee while his real family was probably planning his funeral. That doesn't change what's real between us. Doesn't it?" She gestured at the papers. "How do we build something genuine when it's all founded on lies, when I don't even know who I really am anymore?" Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw a woman with a young girl, both carrying flowers. Elena and David's daughter. I realized with a sinking heart. "I can't do this," Maggie whispered, backing away from the window. "I can't face them. I can't face any of this." She was already reaching for her keys, already running, and I had to make a choice. Follow her or let her go. I let her go. Not because I didn't want to follow, every instinct screamed at me to chase after her, but because Elena and that little girl deserved answers too. Someone had to face the wreckage David left behind, and Maggie was in no condition to do it. Elena turned out to be nothing like what I'd imagined. She was soft-spoken, kind, and just as devastated as Maggie. Her daughter, Sophia, clung to her mother's hand, while Elena explained that David had promised to leave his wife when the time was right. He said he was waiting for Margaret to be ready. Elena said, tears streaming down her face, that she was fragile, that the truth would destroy her. I thought he was being compassionate. The irony was staggering. David had used both women's supposed fragility as an excuse to maintain his comfortable lies. For 3 days I heard nothing from Maggie. Her phone went straight to voicemail, her photography studio was closed. Even her sister, whom I finally tracked down, had no idea where she'd gone. On the 4th day, I found her at the diner where we'd talked that first night. Our diner, though we'd never said as much. She was sitting in the same corner booth, staring into a cup of coffee that had probably gone cold hours ago. "I've been coming here every morning," she said without looking up when I slid into the seat across from her, "trying to remember who I was before David, before all of this." She looked exhausted, worn thin. "Any luck?" "Some." She finally met my eyes, and I saw something different there, harder but also clearer. I remembered that I used to want to travel. Before David, I had plans to document small towns across America, capture the stories people don't usually tell. That sounds amazing. I also remembered that I don't actually like chamomile tea. David always insisted it was good for my nerves, so I convinced myself I enjoyed it. She smiled wryly. "Turns out I prefer coffee, black coffee, like that night at the hospital." I understood what she wasn't saying. She was reclaiming herself piece by piece. "James," she said quietly, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest." My stomach clenched. "Okay, that night, when you stayed with me, was it pity? Were you just being kind to your boss's grieving widow?" The question gutted me. Is that really what you think? I don't know what to think anymore. Her voice broke slightly. Everything I believed about my life was a lie. How do I know what was real? I leaned forward, catching her hands in mine. This is real, what I feel for you, what I've felt since that night. It has nothing to do with David or grief or pity. You want honesty? I stayed because you were the most genuine person I'd ever met, even in your devastation. I stayed because walking away from you felt impossible. She stared at our joined hands for a long moment. I'm thinking about leaving, she whispered. Taking that photography trip, starting over somewhere new. My heart stopped. Alone? I don't know. Maybe. She looked up at me, her eyes searching. The question is, are you brave enough to come with someone who's still figuring out who she really is? Are you asking me to run away with you? I asked, trying to keep my voice light despite the way my heart was hammering. I'm asking you to start fresh with me. She squeezed my hands. No more shadows, no more guilt about David or what we should or shouldn't feel. Just us, figuring out what this could be without all the baggage. I looked at this remarkable woman, stronger now than when I'd first met her, but still vulnerable, still healing, still choosing hope despite everything. I turned in my resignation yesterday, I said quietly. Her eyes widened. James, I've been thinking about what you said, about traveling and telling stories people don't usually tell. Turns out I've been hiding too, from my own dreams, from taking risks. I lifted our joined hands to my lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. So yes, Maggie, I'm brave enough to go anywhere with you. The smile that bloomed across her face was radiant, transforming her completely. Even if I don't know where we're going yet. Especially then. She slid around the booth until she was beside me, and this time when she looked at my lips, nothing interrupted us. The kiss was soft, tentative at first, then deeper as months of careful distance finally collapsed. She tasted like coffee and possibility, like the beginning of something entirely new. I have conditions, she murmured against my lips. I'm listening. We take my car, it has better gas mileage. We split driving duties, but I get to pick the music for the first week and, she hesitated, suddenly shy, we take it slow. Really get to know each other without any preconceived notions. Deal. I tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, though I should warn you, my taste in music is questionable at best. I'll cope. She laughed, the sound lighter than I'd heard in months. We should probably tell people where we're going, shouldn't we? Your family, my sister, eventually. But first I want to show you something. I pulled out my phone, opening the Notes app where I'd been writing. Remember how I mentioned I was working on a novel? I started a new one, about a woman who discovers her strength while learning to see herself clearly again, and about a man who learns that sometimes the most beautiful things grow in the most unexpected places. Her eyes filled with tears, good tears this time. You've been writing about us, about the possibility of us, about second chances and honest love. I closed the phone, meeting her gaze. The ending's still unwritten though. Good, she said, leaning into me. The best stories are the ones we write as we live them. 6 months later, I'm writing this from a small town in Montana, watching Maggie capture the story of a family who's run the same diner for 4 generations. She's laughing with the owner's daughter, her camera forgotten for the moment, and the sight fills me with a happiness so complete it sometimes takes my breath away. We're not the same people who met in grief at a hospital. We're better, more honest, more ourselves, and every day, we choose each other again. The best love stories, I've learned, aren't about perfect